So, Dan, you say there that the West should be pressuring Hamas more and they are coming down on Israel harder. However, the West has been sending weapons to Israel so that you can make sure and the country can make sure that it defends itself. And I think a lot of the Western countries who now want to recognize a Palestinian state is because they are seeing these chaotic scenes that are continuing to emerge from Gaza. Violence, starvation, Israel's tight control on aid in the region, people absolutely suffering. You know, we know that the October the 7th atrocities were absolutely horrendous and nobody can deny that. But now over 60,000 people have died in Gaza, and many people are now thinking it's disproportionate and this needs to stop. But Israel has had a lot of Western backing.
Indeed, it has backing, but when push comes to shove, especially now in this final stretch, what is needed is concerted Western pressure on Hamas, and that's being shifted on Israel. The threats to recognize a Palestinian state might be well-meaning in this sense, but they only produce a negative result. Hamas's leaders themselves went on air and said that this international rush to recognize a Palestinian state is the fruit of their October 7th attack. Not to mention that recognizing a Palestinian state it needs to be without Hamas. And again, the Arab states have actually highlighted this. In the small text, the Western states have highlighted this as well. But any future Palestinian entity, whatever it is, has to be reached in a compromise with Israel, and it cannot in any way, shape, or form include Hamas. Hamas is willing to say that it will not remain the governing entity of Gaza after a ceasefire is in place, but they're not willing to give up their arms, which means you'll have a Hezbollah-like situation where they are the real power on the ground. And add to that there is no entity of any of the Palestinian political entities who can even manage a state at this point. It would become another terrorist state. It would become a state mired in chaos and terrorism. And just on one last little point, yes, a lot of Palestinians have died. It's important to note that a significant number of them are militants or military-aged men. Israel is doing an extraordinary amount, and I say this as someone with a background in military history and affairs, to minimize as much as is possible during war. That's a difficult thing to do, civilian casualties, and it's very hard in a place like Gaza, especially where Hamas utilizes the civilian population as human shields as part of its strategy.
Okay, well, Dan, right now on our screens, we're seeing children desperately trying to get food. I have spoken to many foreign doctors working inside of Gaza, and the medical situation there is absolutely dire. No medical aid is getting in. They are telling me that people are coming into the hospitals with gun wounds to their heads, to their shoulders from the GHF aid sites. So it's not just fair to say many of these people have been militants, because we know they have been innocent families, they've been fathers,
they
have
been
children.
Say all of them. I agree with you, many of them have. I didn't say all of them are military-aged men. There have been civilians killed, and I agree with you, the situation is dire. I think the Israeli approach going back in March to cut off aid as a point to pressure Hamas was a mistaken approach. And what you're seeing now, unfortunately, even though Israel has made a concerted effort to try to flood in as much aid as possible, is that the actual, what we call the last mile delivery mechanism of the aid is completely, or almost completely, UN reports and other reports estimate over 80% are hijacked almost immediately by Hamas or other militant or armed groups. And either being resold on the black market at exorbitant rates. I see you showing these footage, and they're very harsh footage, but these are children with pre-existing conditions exacerbated by the very difficult conditions on the ground. What we need is a unified approach to flood Gaza with humanitarian aid. Israel has lifted all restrictions. There are hundreds and hundreds of trucks waiting on the borders to be sent in. The United Nations is still hesitant and refusing to work with the GHF mechanism. Israel allowing or not allowing the aid is not the issue. The issue is that Hamas continues to hijack most of the aid as it comes in. And so there are parts of Gaza where aid is flowing, where people are safe. Southern Gaza, if you were to show those pictures, you would see a very different picture. The places where Israel has less control are these kinds of sites where you're showing these pictures, where these are Hamas-dominated areas and where Hamas thrives and continues to thrive on creating such chaos, on creating such violence, and ensuring that the desperate people of Gaza are supported by Hamas itself, and it uses its arms to ensure that. It uses its thuggish and brutal behavior to do that. And the Palestinians themselves are calling for Hamas to leave. The Arab world is calling for Hamas to leave and step down. The best solution that would actually prevent Israel from trying to retake the remaining 25% of the Gaza Strip, which includes Gaza City, would be concerted pressure on the Hamas leadership to disarm, to go into exile in exchange for safety, and to hand over the administration of Gaza to a moderate, non-Hamas linked Palestinian entity that would be backed by the moderate Arab countries and which Israel could get out. That would really be the best solution for this. That's what Israel is seeking. And I think what we need is, instead of pressure on Israel, we need pressure on Hamas in order to accept this demand. Every time that such PR campaigns come out of Hamas through Al Jazeera and other stations and into the Western media, and then the Western leaders pressure Israel, you see Hamas getting these PR victory points that translate into actual strategic diplomatic achievements. And so that is detrimental to the very cause of trying to defeat Hamas.
So, Dan, I've just heard you there, and obviously I am listening to what you are saying, but it's very difficult for us to verify any information because Israel has, of course, stopped international journalists on the ground. None of us can go into Gaza. None of us can report the truth. So that is the difficulty right now where we are. But I just want to move on this conversation because Israel's opposition leader is urging government supporters to join Sunday's planned general strike. Now, we have seen lots of demonstrations in Israel right now against the government's plans and the coalition as it stands at the moment. More demonstrations to come over the weekend. Do you think, and do many people think in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership is now becoming untenable?
Yeah, I mean, his leadership here, I'm speaking from a domestic voter point of view, has been on question and has been challenged multiple times over the last few years. Of course, prior to the October 7th attack, his leadership on the war has been called into question. His political standing, which took a huge dive and then only resurged after the seemingly successful strikes on Hezbollah and then later on Iran. There is a lot of tension here in Israel. The public has voiced that it is tired. Also, the military leadership has voiced that the reservists who are fighting hundreds and hundreds of days in Gaza are tired, and the military and much of the public is not behind continuing this war. The challenge that we face here, and I urge the viewers or the listeners here to try to think about this from Israel's very tough predicament, is that anytime Israel shows its willingness or its even desire to reach a ceasefire and a diplomatic solution, Hamas only hardens its target, pulls out of peace talks, as we saw just last week or 2 weeks ago, and makes it very difficult to reach the very ceasefire. And so Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet have to play a double game. And that is speak very harshly, make big threats or plans to escalate in the hope of communicating with Hamas that there's no way that Hamas is coming out of this in any kind of victory and that it will be defeated. And so what I think really is happening is that the government is trying to pressure Hamas, to pressure the region, to pressure the international community to step in and get Hamas to back down. I don't think, and this is something that's very hard to communicate to your public, your own domestic audience, who is tired and wants this war to wrap up, who wants the 20 remaining living hostages. And we saw the pictures that they are in actual starvation on the brink of severe malnutrition and death, to come home before it's too late. The problem is always this double game that needs to be played. What do you communicate to Hamas and to those on the ground who are making the decisions from their point of view, and what do you communicate to your own domestic audience? And unfortunately, those two lines of communication, those two strategies, seem to be at odds with each other. And so what we need here really is regional and international diplomatic intervention to pressure Hamas and not to pressure Israel, because Israel has articulated and communicated that it is looking for a way to wrap this up. If we're seeing signs from the White House that they are also wanting this to wrap up and are trying to put together some kind of one stage, end this in one stage deal rather than a phase deal that was
Dan Feferman, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to leave it there. We're just out of time now, but it was really interesting to have your insights and your thoughts. We appreciate your time. Dan Feferman, co-editor of Middle East 24. Thank you. Let's continue this conversation now with Dr. Hanan Balkhy, the WHO Regional Director for the Eastern Mediterranean. Dr. Hanan, what a pleasure to have you on the show. So we just heard there from Dan Feferman, who is in Israel. What is your take on the current reality inside Gaza in regards to the aid and reported malnutrition? Because we just heard our former guest, and he was saying that aid is going in, but it's been stolen by Hamas, and the children that we see who are malnutritioned or starving have had former problems before.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I think the situation in Gaza is way beyond the word catastrophe. It is catastrophic by every sense of this word. For almost 2 years, an entire population has been attacked, traumatized, displaced, and cut off from any kind of life-saving aid. The sewage is backflowing, safe water is hard to access, diseases are spreading extremely fast, and we have evidence for that through the surveillance and through the cases that we're seeing throughout those hospitals. Children are actually dying from hunger. Nowhere is safe in Gaza. Health workers and the humanitarian aid workers have been arrested, mistreated, humiliated. Our warehouse, the major warehouse for medical treatment has been attacked on the 21st of July. The level of deprivation is extremely high, nothing that we've seen in any of our previous countries. So the situation is extremely difficult. The fact that they're talking about, or any inclination that the health system or the health in Gaza was already weak, the reality is before October 7, the immunization rates in Gaza and the well-being of the children was among the best in the region. The Gazans are very well educated when it comes to understanding the need and the benefits of immunizations and good food nutrition. So what we're seeing today is because of the significant atrocities that are taking place on the ground, and the significant destruction of the infrastructure. I was in Gaza in July 2024, and it was already catastrophic. And right now it is way beyond description. Your second question on aid entering in, did I hear you right on that one? Was that your second part?
So I was just asking you, because earlier I was speaking to Dan. I'm not sure if you heard my conversation, Dan Feferman, who is in Tel Aviv, and he was saying to me that when it comes to aid, Israel and the GHF are letting enough aid into the country, but Hamas are stealing that aid, and that is why people are starving. Do you agree with that? Do you think enough humanitarian aid is coming into the country and that it is being looted?
The reality is we need a minimum of 2,000 metric tons of food is needed on a daily basis. What is happening right now is not even a fraction of what is needed for the people on a daily basis. The healthcare facilities and what exists of the healthcare facilities, what is left of them, are seeing the different types of trauma from people at the food distribution sites that you are referring to, and they're coming back from those sites with significant traumas and injuries. So the reality is that there is not enough aid by any stretch of the imagination going into the strip of Gaza. Even the airdrops that are taking place today are barely going to support any of the needs of the Gazan people. The best way and the safest way and the most proven way where the food goes from the humanitarian aid entities through the UN system to the people who are needing it. Specifically for the medical aid going through the WHO and the UN partners goes from us directly to the healthcare facilities that are needing them. There has been no evidence that Hamas has taken or looted any of this food nor of our medical products at this moment.